The automatic doors of Stella's bistro slid open with a soft hiss. Theron stepped inside first, his massive 7-foot frame blocking most of the doorway. His obsidian scales caught the warm amber lights hanging from the ceiling, making them shimmer like polished stone. Behind him, moving much slower, came his son. Kale was only 12 in human years, but already the stairs had taught him to keep his head down. His left wing, the one that never grew right, hung at an awkward angle against his small back. The mobility frame wrapped around his legs like a second skeleton, chrome and black, hissing softly with each careful step. It helped him walk, but it also announced his presence to everyone in the room. The conversations didn't stop exactly, but they shifted. Voices dropped to whispers. Eyes glanced over, then quickly away. Theron had seen it 1,000 times. On Draconis Prime, their homeworld, people didn't even bother to hide their disgust. They would cross the street, pull their children closer, whisper words like defective and genetic failure, just loud enough for him to hear. Here on Meridian Station, at least the aliens tried to be polite about their staring. Theron had chosen this restaurant specifically because it was human-run. Humans were strange creatures, soft and small, but they had something his people lacked. They didn't seem to care as much about perfection. Their own bodies came in so many different shapes and sizes that maybe they had learned not to judge. Or maybe Theron was just desperate enough to hope. Table for two? The voice came from a woman who appeared beside them so naturally that Theron almost didn't notice her approach. She wore the standard server uniform, black pants and a crisp white shirt, with a name tag pinned to her chest that read Rachel in simple letters. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her face held the kind of easy smile that came from years of working with strangers. But she wasn't looking at Theron. Her brown eyes were focused entirely on Kale. That itself was unusual. Most people acknowledged Theron first. He was the one with money, with power, with the intimidating presence of a draconian billionaire. His son was just the unfortunate shadow behind him. Then Rachel did something that made Theron's breath catch in his throat. She knelt down. Right there in the middle of the restaurant, this human woman dropped to one knee so she could look Kale directly in his golden eyes. Not down at him. Not past him. Directly at him as an equal. "Hey there," Rachel said, her voice warm and friendly. "Want a booth or a window seat?" Kale froze. His small clawed hands gripped the handles of his mobility frame tighter. His mouth opened, then closed. Theron could see the confusion rippling across his son's face in the subtle shift of his scales. No one ever asked Kale what he wanted. Not doctors who poked and prodded him. Not the private tutors who taught him at home because regular schools refused to accommodate his needs. Not even the servants in their mansion who arranged everything for the young master, without ever consulting him. "Window," Kale finally managed to stammer out, his voice barely above a whisper. Rachel's smile grew wider, showing white teeth. "Perfect choice, buddy. You can see the ships coming in from the docking bays. We've got a Zentarii cargo hauler scheduled to arrive in about 20 minutes. Those things are massive." She stood up smoothly and gestured for them to follow. "Right this way." As they walked through the restaurant, Theron noticed something that made his chest tighten. Rachel matched her pace to Kale's. Not rushing ahead and waiting impatiently. Not hovering awkwardly behind. She walked beside him, casual and natural, as if the slow mechanical hiss of the mobility frame was just another sound in the busy restaurant. She led them to a corner table right by the massive observation window. Outside, the infinite black of space stretched out, dotted with distant stars and the blinking lights of passing ships. The view was spectacular, probably the best table in the entire restaurant. "Here we go," Rachel said, pulling out a chair for Kale. She adjusted it slightly, making sure there was enough room for his frame to fit comfortably. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that drew attention. Just a small, thoughtful gesture. Kale settled into his seat, and for the first time since they had entered, Theron saw something in his son's expression that had become increasingly rare. His scales had brightened. Just slightly, just a shade lighter than their usual dark bronze, but enough to notice. It was a draconian biological response, something they couldn't control. When his people felt genuine happiness, their scales literally glowed brighter. Theron had almost forgotten his son could still do that. He sat down across from Kale, his own massive frame making the chair creak slightly under his weight. Rachel handed them both menus, the digital displays flickering to life with options in multiple languages. "Take your time looking these over," she said. "I'll be back in a few minutes to grab your drink orders." "And Kale?" She looked at the boy again. "If you need anything, and I mean anything, you just wave me down, okay? This is your meal too." Then she walked away, leaving Theron staring after her in stunned silence. In that simple interaction, this human waitress had done something no one on Draconis Prime had managed in 12 years. She had treated his son like a person. Kale's meal sat mostly untouched on the plate in front of him. The grilled protein, some kind of station-grown substitute that tasted close enough to home, had been cut into neat pieces. But the boy just pushed them around with his fork, barely taking a bite. Theron didn't push him to eat. He had learned years ago that forcing the issue only made things worse. Besides, his own appetite had vanished the moment they sat down. It always did these days. Meals had become just another duty to fulfill, another box to check in their carefully controlled routine. But then something changed. Kale's tail, the long scaled appendage that draped from the back of his chair to the floor, began to move. It was subtle at first, just a tiny twitch at the tip. Theron almost missed it. His son usually kept his tail completely still in public. Any movement drew attention, and attention meant stares, and stares meant questions neither of them wanted to answer. Yet now the tail was swaying. Gently. Side to side. Following some invisible pattern. Theron's eyes tracked the direction of his son's gaze and found the source. In the corner of the restaurant, a small raised platform served as a stage. 3 musicians occupied it, playing instruments Theron didn't fully recognize. One was clearly human, holding some kind of stringed device that produced smooth, flowing notes. Another was Zentarii, their 4 arms working across a percussion setup that created complex layered rhythms. The third musician played something that looked like wind chimes but produced sounds that felt almost liquid. The music was unlike anything from Draconis Prime. Back home, music was formal. Structured. Rigid patterns played at state ceremonies and official functions. This was different. It wandered and explored, each instrument having a conversation with the others, sometimes agreeing, sometimes playfully arguing, but always moving forward together. And Kale was responding to it. His whole body had begun to move in tiny, unconscious ways. His head bobbed slightly. His shoulders rolled with the rhythm. Even his damaged wing twitched in time with the beat. Theron felt something crack inside his chest. When was the last time he had seen his son move with joy instead of necessity? He likes the music? Rachel had returned, carrying a tray with their drinks. She set down a glass of water for Theron and some kind of sweet fruit juice for Kale. But her attention was entirely on the boy, watching him sway to the rhythm with genuine interest. Yes, Theron admitted, the words feeling heavy in his mouth. Admitting that his son enjoyed something felt dangerous somehow. As if acknowledging joy would make it disappear. Rachel nodded, a knowing smile crossing her face. She glanced at the band, then back at Kale. You know, there's a community dance thing happening in the plaza right outside after my shift ends. Happens every weekend. I teach a few basic steps before the open floor starts, just to get people comfortable. Then everyone just moves however they want. She set down the last drink and looked directly at Kale again. That same direct, respectful eye contact she had given him when they first arrived. You ever dance? The effect was immediate. Kale's scales, which had brightened to a warm bronze while listening to the music, suddenly flushed deep purple. It was the color of embarrassment, of shame, spreading from his neck up to his face. His tail stopped moving entirely, going rigid again. I can't, he whispered, staring down at his plate. Rachel tilted her head slightly, her expression curious rather than pitying. Can't? Or haven't tried yet? The question seemed to genuinely confuse Kale. His golden eyes flicked up to meet hers, then over to his father, then back down. His small clawed fingers gripped the edge of the table. Theron felt he needed to intervene. To protect his son from this well-meaning but misguided human. Rachel, my son has limited mobility, he said carefully, keeping his voice low and controlled. Draconian traditional dances require full wing extension, complex footwork, partner lifts. The physical demands are. I'm not teaching draconian dances, Rachel interrupted, but her tone was gentle, not confrontational. She pulled out a chair from a nearby empty table and sat down, bringing herself back to Kale's eye level again. And honestly, the best dancers I know don't do things traditionally. They create their own style. Make the movement fit them instead of trying to fit the movement. She leaned forward slightly, her expression earnest. Look, I teach adaptive dance back on Earth. That's kind of my thing. I've worked with people who move in wheelchairs, people who can't hear the music, people who dance sitting down, people who use one arm, people who dance with their eyes. Movement isn't about having the right body. It's about expressing yourself with whatever body you have. Kale was staring at her now, really staring, like she was speaking a language he had never heard before but somehow understood. Rachel smiled. Want to come watch? No pressure to join in. No pressure to do anything. Just come watch other people move. See what it looks like when everyone gets to participate. Cale turned to look at his father. And in that look, Theron saw something that absolutely shattered him. Hope. Raw, vulnerable, desperate hope. The kind of hope he thought his son had lost years ago, beaten down by rejection and medical failures and pitying looks. His son wanted this. Wanted it so badly that his scales were already starting to brighten again, fighting against the purple embarrassment with hints of golden anticipation. Theron had spent years trying to fix Cale. Trying to make him fit into a society that had already decided he didn't belong. And here was this human, this stranger, offering something completely different. Not a cure. Not a fix. Just a chance to exist as he was. The word came out before Theron could fully process what he was agreeing to. "We'll be there," he heard himself say. Cale's scales blazed bright gold. Pure, undiluted happiness. The plaza outside Stella's bistro had transformed into something magical. Strings of bioluminescent lights crisscrossed overhead, casting everything in soft blues and purples and greens. The lights pulsed gently to their own rhythm, creating an atmosphere that felt alive. The space was packed with beings from across the galaxy. Theron counted at least 15 different species in the crowd, maybe more. He sat on a bench near the back, trying to make himself small despite his massive frame. Cale sat beside him, perched on the edge of the seat, his golden eyes fixed on the small raised platform at the center of the plaza where Rachel stood. She had changed out of her work uniform into something more practical for movement. Simple clothes that let her body move freely. A portable speaker sat beside her, and the same kind of music from the restaurant filled the air around them. That wandering, conversational music that seemed to welcome everyone into it. "All right everyone, thanks for coming out tonight," Rachel called out, her voice carrying across the plaza without needing amplification. She had the kind of voice that just naturally made people want to listen. "For those new here, I'm Rachel, and before we open up the floor for everyone to just move however they want, I like to teach a few basic steps. Nothing complicated. Just ways to connect with each other through movement." The crowd settled in, forming a loose semicircle around the platform. Theron noticed humans, Zentarii, Quilans with their crystalline bodies, even a few draconians scattered throughout. His scales prickled with anxiety at seeing his own kind here. Would they recognize him? Would they see Cale? "Now here's the thing," Rachel continued, starting to demonstrate a simple step pattern. "Dance isn't about fancy footwork or perfect technique. It's about connection and rhythm. It's about being present with yourself and with others." She moved across the platform, her steps clear and easy to follow. "So we're going to adapt these moves. Because everybody here has a different body, different ways of moving, and that's not a problem. That's the whole point." She stopped and smiled at the crowd. "Watch this." Rachel sat down on the platform floor, crossing her legs. Then she did the same movement pattern, but seated. Her upper body swayed, her arms created the shapes, her head kept the rhythm. It looked completely natural, like the dance had always been meant to be done this way. "Same dance, different body position," she explained, standing back up. She gestured to a Zentarii in the front. "Can you come up here for a second?" The Zentarii, a being with 4 arms and a lower body that was more tentacle than legs, floated up to the platform using their natural anti-gravity ability. Rachel showed them the pattern, and the Zentarii adapted it instantly, their 4 arms creating beautiful flowing shapes, their tentacles swaying in rhythm. "See," Rachel said. Same connection, same rhythm, different expression. The crowd murmured appreciatively. Theron could hear conversations starting up, people excited by what they were seeing. This wasn't just dance instruction. This was something deeper. A philosophy that said everyone belonged. "Okay, so now I need a volunteer to demonstrate leading," Rachel announced, scanning the crowd. "Leading just means you create the pattern and your partner follows your energy. Who wants to try?" Theron felt Cale tense beside him. Then, before Theron could even turn his head, his son's hand shot straight up into the air. "No," Theron started, reaching for Cale's arm. But Rachel had already spotted him. She was walking toward them, weaving through the crowd, that same warm smile on her face. The crowd parted to let her through, and suddenly Theron felt exposed, visible, with dozens of eyes turning to look at them. Rachel knelt down in front of Cale, ignoring Theron entirely. "You sure?" she asked the boy quietly, her voice low enough that only they could hear. "No pressure. Only if you want to." Cale was trembling. Theron could see it in the way his small claws gripped the edge of the bench, in the rapid flickering of his scales between colors. But when the boy spoke, his voice was steady. "I want to." Rachel offered her hand. Kale took it and stood up, his mobility frame hissing softly. Together they walked to the platform and Theron felt his heart physically clench in his chest. This was going to be a disaster. This was going to be humiliation. The other Draconians in the crowd would see his defective son trying to dance, and they would laugh and they would report back to Draconis Prime and everything would get worse. He wanted to stop it. Wanted to grab Kale and carry him away from this place. But his body wouldn't move. Rachel helped Kale up onto the platform. The crowd had gone quiet, watching with curiosity. Theron could see a few beings whispering to each other and he wanted to disappear. "Okay everyone," Rachel announced, her voice bright and confident. "This is Kale. He's going to lead and I'm going to follow. Kale, you create the pattern. Whatever feels right to you. I'll match your energy." She looked at Kale and nodded. The music started. For a moment nothing happened. Kale stood frozen, and Theron could see the panic starting to set in on his son's face. But then Rachel did something brilliant. She started swaying gently to the music, just existing in the rhythm, showing Kale that there was no wrong way to begin. And Kale began to move. It started in his shoulders, a rolling motion that traveled down his spine. Rachel immediately mirrored it, her own shoulders rolling in the same pattern. Encouraged, Kale extended his right wing, the one that worked properly, spreading it out in a graceful arc. Rachel extended her right arm in response, creating a similar shape with her human body. Then Kale's mobility frame shifted, the mechanical legs adjusting his stance, and Rachel shifted her weight to match, creating balance where Kale had created movement. Something incredible was happening. Kale wasn't trying to adapt to some predetermined dance. The dance was adapting to him. He was creating something new, using the body he had, the way he moved, and it was beautiful. The crowd began to clap, not in applause but in rhythm, adding percussion to the music. Then others started moving, trying Kale's patterns themselves, modifying them for their own bodies. Azentarii rolled their shoulders. Aquilin created wing-like shapes with their crystalline arms. Even a few humans tried the mobility frame shift, swaying their weight in echo of Kale's movement. Theron stared at his son. Kale's scales were blazing brilliant gold, brighter than Theron had seen in years. His face showed pure, undiluted joy. He wasn't being accommodated. He wasn't being pitted. He was being celebrated. He was leading. And everyone was following. After the dance ended and the crowd began to disperse into their own free movements across the plaza, Theron remained frozen on the bench. His massive frame felt impossibly heavy, like gravity had suddenly tripled. His chest heaved, drawing air in sharp, painful gasps that he couldn't seem to control. Moisture gathered at the corners of his eyes. What was happening? The thing Draconians called the weakness. The ultimate shame. The complete loss of control that marked someone as emotionally unstable, unfit for society. Humans had a simpler word for it. Crying. He tried to stop it. Clenched his jaw. Forced his breathing to steady. But the tears came anyway, hot and foreign, rolling down his scaled cheeks and dripping onto his expensive suit. His whole body shook with the force of emotions he had buried for years. Through his blurred vision, he watched Kale on the plaza floor. His son was surrounded by other dancers, demonstrating the shoulder roll movement to a group that had gathered around him. They were asking him questions. Asking him to show them more. Treating him like a teacher, like someone with knowledge worth sharing. A soft weight settled on the bench beside him. Rachel had sat down, close enough to offer presence but far enough to give him space. She held out a simple cloth napkin, the kind from the restaurant, folded into a neat square. Theron took it with trembling claws and pressed it against his face. The cloth came away damp. "I've spent billions," he whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. Each word felt like it was being dragged up from somewhere deep inside him. Every specialist in the known galaxy. Every treatment, every experimental procedure, every supposed cure. I've taken him to hospitals on 17 different worlds. I've paid for genetic therapists, cybernetic surgeons, regeneration specialists. He gestured helplessly toward the plaza, toward his son who was now laughing as he showed his Azentarii how to create wing-like motions with their forearms. "And you just..." He couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't articulate what Rachel had done in the span of a few hours that all his money and desperation had failed to accomplish in 12 years. Rachel sat quietly for a moment, watching the dancers. When she spoke, her voice was soft but firm. "I didn't cure him. There was nothing to cure." The words hit Theron like a physical blow. He's disabled. On Draconis Prime in our society that means he's defective. It means he'll never hold a position of respect. He'll never be seen as a full person. It means... "I know what it means," Rachel interrupted gently. She turned to face him, and her expression held no pity, just understanding. We had the same problem on Earth. For a long, long time. Centuries, actually. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her eyes distant with memory. We treated disability like it was brokenness. Like people with different bodies or different minds were problems that needed solving. We hid them away. Put them in institutions. Told them they couldn't go to school, couldn't work, couldn't participate in normal life. We spent all our energy trying to fix people instead of fixing our society. Theron wiped at his eyes again, the napkin now thoroughly soaked. What changed? We learned, Rachel said simply. Slowly. Painfully slowly. But we learned that accessibility isn't charity. It's not about being nice to people who are less fortunate. It's about unlocking potential that we were too stupid and too rigid to see. She nodded toward Kale. Your son doesn't need to be fixed. He needs a world that makes space for him. But he can't, Theron started. He can't do things the way you expected, Rachel corrected, her voice gaining strength. The way your society told you things should be done. But look at him right now. Really look. Theron forced himself to focus through the tears. Kale was demonstrating a new movement now, this one incorporating the way his mobility frame pivoted. Aquilin with a crystalline body structure was trying to replicate it, creating something beautiful and completely unique by translating Kale's movement into their own form. He just taught 20 different species a new style of movement, Rachel continued. That's innovation. That's creativity. That's leadership. Those beings aren't learning from him out of pity. They're learning because he created something valuable, something they'd never seen before. She paused, letting her words sink in. You've spent 12 years and billions of credits trying to fix your son so he could fit into your world. But maybe, just maybe, it's your world that needs fixing. The statement hung in the air between them. Theron felt something fundamental shifting inside his chest, like tectonic plates grinding against each other, rearranging the landscape of everything he had ever believed. Across the plaza, an older draconian male, his scales marked with the honor patterns of a merchant-class elder, was attempting Kale's shoulder roll. He was doing it with visible concentration, his movements careful and deliberate. And he was smiling. Actually smiling as a young disabled boy taught him something new. When was the last time Theron had seen a draconian elder smile at someone from a lower caste, much less learn from them? Kale noticed his father watching and waved enthusiastically. His scales were still that brilliant, blazing gold. The color of pure joy. The color Theron had been desperately trying to create through medical intervention, through surgeries and treatments and experimental drugs. Rachel had created it in an evening. Not by fixing Kale. But by creating a space where Kale didn't need fixing. Everything Theron had built his life around, every assumption he had made about his son's future, every fear he had carried, shattered like station glass in explosive decompression. The fragments fell away, revealing something underneath that he had never allowed himself to see before. His son wasn't broken. The world that rejected him was broken. And broken things could be rebuilt. Theron looked at Rachel, this human waitress who taught dance on weekends, and realized she had given him something more valuable than all the medical expertise money could buy. She had given him hope. Real hope. Not the desperate hope for a cure, but the revolutionary hope that a cure was never necessary in the first place. 6 months passed like a dream, though the reality was far messier than any dream could be. Theron had returned to Draconis Prime the week after the dance in the plaza, but he hadn't returned as the same person. He had come back with a fire in his chest that no amount of elite disapproval could extinguish. The first thing he did was start selling. Estates, company shares, luxury ships, investments across a dozen worlds. His financial advisors thought he had lost his mind. His business partners threatened to sue. The Council of Elders summoned him for 3 separate interrogations, demanding to know why he was destroying the family fortune. He told them the truth. He was going to build something his world had never seen before. The Draconis Adaptive Institute rose from the ground in the capital city's education district, a location that made the traditional families uncomfortable. The building itself was a rebellion against every architectural norm. Where draconian structures emphasized height and grandeur, showing off wingspan and climbing ability, this building spread wide and accessible. Ramps curved alongside stairs. Elevators operated on voice command, touch, and motion sensors. Doors opened wide enough for mobility frames, for wheelchairs, for beings of any size. Human consultants had worked alongside draconian architects, and the arguments had been legendary. But the result was something unprecedented. Adjustable platforms that could raise or lower for different heights. sensory-friendly quiet rooms for those who got overwhelmed. Classrooms designed so everyone could see and participate, regardless of how their body worked. The opening ceremony drew a crowd that nobody had expected. 300 young draconians stood in the courtyard, many with visible disabilities that would have kept them hidden away in the past. Some used mobility aids. Some had wing deformities. Some had cognitive differences. All of them had been told, in one way or another, that they had no place in draconian society. Today they had come to claim their place. Theron stood on the stage that had been built at ground level, specifically so everyone could see it without looking up. Rachel stood beside him, wearing formal human clothing that still somehow looked casual compared to the elaborate draconian robes surrounding them. She had taken a leave of absence from Stella's Bistro to help set up the Institute's programs. 3 other human specialists had come with her, experts in adaptive education, accessible design, and inclusive practices. "The elders still call me a fool," Theron murmured to Rachel as they waited for the ceremony to begin. His voice was low enough that only she could hear. Rachel glanced around at the crowd, then back at him with a slight smile. "The elders aren't here. Notice that? But 300 young draconians are. The ones your society said had no future. They're here. Their families are here. And look, media drones from 17 news networks." She was right. The traditional power structure had refused to attend, but everyone else had shown up. Parents who had hidden their children for years, now standing proud in public. Younger draconians who had secretly felt like failures, now seeing possibility for the first time. Even some off-world species who had heard about the project and come to witness history. At the center of it all stood Kale. He had grown in the past 6 months, not just in height but in confidence. His mobility frame, once plain and clinical, was now decorated with cultural honor marks. The traditional patterns of achievement and recognition, painted in gold and crimson. Theron had fought the council for 3 months to get permission to apply those marks to a mobility device. They had argued it was sacrilege. He had argued it was long overdue. He had won. Kale held the ceremonial ribbon stretched across the Institute's main entrance, oversized scissors in his claws. But before he cut it, he turned to face the crowd. Someone handed him a microphone, and his young voice carried across the courtyard. "We were taught we needed fixing," Kale said, his words clear and steady. "No stammer now. No hesitation. We were told our bodies were wrong. Our minds were wrong. That we couldn't be full members of society until we became normal." He paused, his golden eyes sweeping across the crowd of disabled draconians who were watching him with held breath. "But maybe," Kale continued, "what needed fixing was how others saw us." The applause started slowly, then built like a wave. The disabled draconians in the crowd cheered. Their families joined in. The human consultants clapped with tears in their eyes. Even some of the media operators broke protocol to show their support. Kale cut the ribbon and the doors opened. The first students walked into the Draconies Adaptive Institute, and Theron felt his scales brighten with pride so intense it was almost painful. Inside, the first classes included aspiring engineers who had been told their hands weren't precise enough. Artists whose vision worked differently. Scientists whose minds processed information in unique ways. All disabled. All brilliant. All previously wasted by a society too rigid to see their value. The revolution didn't stop there. A year after the Institute opened, the first accessible Draconian starship launched from the homeworld. Its crew was mixed ability, proving that space travel didn't require a perfect body, just a capable mind and proper accommodation. The galactic news networks called it revolutionary, a breakthrough moment in Draconian history. Theron watched the launch from the Institute and called it something else. Overdue. Back on Meridian Station, every weekend the plaza still filled with dancers. Kale taught his weekly adaptive dance class, and the crowd had grown massive. Beings from across the quadrant came to learn that movement had infinite forms, that there was no single right way to exist in your body. Rachel still worked some shifts at Stella's Bistro, but mostly she coordinated with the Institute. She stood in her usual spot in the plaza, watching Kale teach a Zentarii and a human to move together despite their vastly different bodies. Theron stood beside her, and his scales held a luster they hadn't had in years. But something fundamental had changed in how he carried himself. The rigid pride of draconian nobility, that stiff-backed arrogance that came from believing in genetic superiority, had been replaced by something his species didn't even have a word for. Humans called it humility. Rachel had taught him that. She had taught him that the strongest people weren't those who never fell, but those who learned to rebuild. That progress wasn't about individual perfection, but about collective inclusion. Theron was no longer a desperate father trying to fix his broken son. He was a changed man, grateful to humanity for teaching him what his ancient, proud civilization had never learned. That different had never meant less. It had always meant more than they'd ever imagined.